Rob, can you chime in and tell me when we're live if we aren't? All right. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our weekly Tuesday afternoon Facebook Live, Seminary Ridge Museum Virtual. We're coming to you every Tuesday at 2 p.m. during this time of quarantine to present on some of the topics that are themes of the museum, but might be a little bit understudied in studies of Gettysburg and the Civil War. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the United States Signal Corps, which is established as a separate branch of the military in March of 1863 and receives what could be called its baptism by fire at the Battle of Gettysburg. But as we're waiting for people to join us, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing during this time of quarantine while the museum is shut down. My name is Pete Miele, by the way. I am Chief Operating Officer and Director of Education at Seminary Ridge Museum. And we are engaging in a lot of Facebook Lives during this month and even probably as we go into May to bring those messages of the museum to you. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m. we have one of these special Facebook Lives. Next Tuesday, Dr. Darrell Black, our executive director, is going to be talking about pro-slavery theology. And then on Friday this week, we actually have a special event just for members. We're holding a history happy hour member Zoom. So if you are a member of Seminary Ridge Museum, we invite you to come and join us on Friday the 24th at 5 p.m. For a conversation about July 1st, 1863, the first day of the battle. So if you look, Rob, who's running the technical side of things today, Rob, our group sales manager, will put links to those events in the comments and you can join. And if you're not a member and you want to join, please click on that link too. Join and help support us during this time when the museum's doors are closed. Make a donation to help support the important work that we're doing. So my topic of conversation today, it's an exciting topic for me. It's a topic that is understudied, I think, in the Battle of Gettysburg, and is one of those topics that I keep coming back to time and again and thinking about and doing some research on, and that is that's the United States Signal Corps. And one of the things that I find very interesting about the Signal Corps is that it's the stuff of armies and battles that it goes beyond the fighting and goes beyond the guns and thinks it gets at how armies work. What are those support services that are necessary to make an army function effectively in the field during battle, and of course the Signal Corps, the Medical Corps, which I've talked on, the quartermaster and logistics, all kind of fit into that. What are those parts of the armies that are generally left out of those stories, but are nonetheless important? And before I get started, I also just want to say, if you have any questions, I'm going to try to be monitoring our Facebook feed here. So, and Rob will be as well. So if you have any questions or comments or anything that comes to mind as you are watching this video, please put it in the comments and I'll try to get it. I see some people from Colorado, Canhurst, Pennsylvania, Rochester, Seattle. So people from all over the country already joining us, and that's fantastic. So, the Signal Corps, it's one of those technological advances of the 19th century. I find myself being very fascinated by how people met those challenges of the 19th century and how what they organized, what they did to overcome those challenges. And of course, the challenge that we see here with the Signal Corps is that armies are getting bigger. And they are operating across vast swaths of land. The Army of the Potomac alone here at the Battle of Gettysburg is operating from Gettysburg, the 1st Corps, 11th Corps up in Gettysburg, and the 6th Corps is down in Manchester, Maryland, 30 miles away. So what does it take to communicate between just portions of the same army, and how can we make those make those parts of the Army operate effectively. So the Civil War provides a really great laboratory for thinking about these challenges of the 19th century and what was put in place to overcome those challenges, and communication, but also medical, which you've heard me speak a lot on, and logistics and organization. It really is something that deserves a lot of study and can tell us a lot about what's going on in the 19th century. So I'm also going to try to share as we go through today. I'm going to try to share. I have a short PowerPoint presentation that when I do this presentation live, and I'm going to try to share to illustrate some of the points that are important to remember. If I can do this, let's see here. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to share my PowerPoint, and we're going to start this PowerPoint. So you should be able to see there the father of the Signal Corps, a man named Dr. Albert Meyer. Dr. Meyer is born in 1827 in Newburgh, New York, not too far from about 50 miles up the Hudson River from New York City, not too far from where I grew up. And Dr. Meyer, before he becomes a doctor, starts his life as an apprentice telegraph operator in Buffalo, starts his working life as a telegraph operator, and then eventually goes on to get a medical degree in 1851. And one of the things that he's interested in as he's studying for this medical degree is a system of communication for people who are deaf and are mute, and actually develops a new way of communicating. And this is really shows early in his life that he's thinking about the importance of communication and fostering communication among people who might not be able to communicate. And he joins the Army as an assistant surgeon in late 1854, and he goes out to Texas. So he's an old a pre-war Army surgeon when the Army was very small in the 1850s, leading up to the Civil War, and spends some time out in Texas. And it's at this time, during this initial service in the late 1850s, that Dr. Meyer really becomes more and more interested in developing this system of communication. And he approaches, believe it or not, Jefferson Davis, who's the Secretary of War in 1856, and proposes this idea of using flags. Wigwag signaling is what it is known as. Using flags, and movements of a flag correspond to letters of the alphabet, and they can be seen from vast distances. And he proposes this to Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, who rejects the initial idea, doesn't think it has much merit. But Dr. Meyer, by doing this, gets some attention from other people in the Army, specifically the chief engineer, Joseph Totten, who keeps Meyer's idea in mind throughout the latter part of the 1850s. And by 1859, Meyer gets a second chance. He gets to propose his idea to a board of examination overseen by none other than Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee, who's commanding the cavalry, 2nd Cavalry at the time, and this idea finally gets some merit. By the early 1860s, Dr. Meyer gets to start testing and perfecting his system. Actually, applies for a patent in 1861 for his idea. And he goes out to New Mexico. Again, this is right on the cusp of the Civil War beginning. Dr. Meyer goes out to Mexico and starts testing his idea in the wars against the Navajo Indians, and starts to really perfect his idea and get some traction there. And so the war breaks out. Of course, the Civil War breaks out in 1861. Dr. Meyer is recalled back to the East, and sets up, believe it or not, a camp for training soldiers in Georgetown, the Red Hill area of Georgetown, and right outside Washington, D.C. And this picture that you hopefully can see on my screen share right here is a group at that signal camp in Georgetown in 1861. Unfortunately for Meyer's case at this time, the Signal Corps has not been established as a separate branch of the military. It still is only very small. Meyer is the chief signal officer, and he's reliant on other men who are given to him by different commands to get trained in this new method of communication. But the problem is that these men are able to be recalled to their commands at any time. So he doesn't have a real set group of people that are just dedicated to the United States Signal Corps. So he has this rocky sort of start, and he's going to spend the first 2 years of the war both being the chief signal officer for the Army of the Potomac, but also trying to train this kind of revolving group of men in his signaling methods, because they have to learn, of course, what the different movements of the flag correspond to different letters, and perfect that, much probably like learning Morse code and things like that for people in the 19th century. So he's constantly going back and forth between the front lines during the Peninsula Campaign and the second Sharpsburg, and going back to Georgetown to help train these men in signaling. And he is becoming very involved with some legislative wrangling as he tries to get the Signal Corps to be dedicated as a separate branch of the military. And by March of 1863, so we're talking only 3 months, 4 months before the Battle of Gettysburg, Meyer finally gets his wish and gets the Signal Corps as a separate branch of the military, and gets a dedicated group of men that are going to stay with him. And they, as I said earlier, are going to receive that baptism by fire at the Battle of Gettysburg. So Meyer is one of those people. I like to think of him really sort of on that same plane as William Hammond, the Surgeon General, Jonathan Letterman, the medical director of the Army of the Potomac, Herman Haupt, military railroads. One of those guys that performs a very important role during the Civil War, but is one of those people that, because he's not a battlefield commander, sort of gets not as much attention as the people that we generally think of: U.S. Grant and Winfield Scott Hancock, George Meade, people like that. One of the ways as he's developing this new system, one of the questions that comes up is, where does he get this idea? And one of the early histories, in fact, the only comprehensive history of the Signal Corps, is written in the late 19th century, and it says that Meyer was observing the way that Comanche Indians were communicating back and forth on the plains using movements of spears, and that's how they were able to communicate. And that's what gave Meyer his idea to use this wigwag signaling as a communication tool. Unfortunately, that has never been proven one way or the other, so it's sort of unclear how he formally came up with this idea. So let's get to the Battle of Gettysburg. How does this new system become employed at the Battle of Gettysburg, and why is it important? So as the Army of the Potomac is moving up through Virginia, coming into Maryland and Pennsylvania, by the 20th of June, 1863, 2 signal officers are dedicated to each of the 7 corps of the Army of the Potomac, and 3 end up going to the Cavalry Corps. There are only 45 men with the Signal Corps of the Army of the Potomac at this point, and we'll talk a little bit later. These men are communicating from different parts of the battlefield throughout the you see the same men communicating from different parts of the battlefield at different times, because they had such a small number of men who knew this code that probably the men were going back and forth to different stations and setting up different stations, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So by the 26th of June, as the Army of the Potomac is making its way across its namesake river and into Maryland and then into Pennsylvania, the Signal Corps has been dispersed to different parts of the Army in order to make sure that communications are constant. And as I said earlier, the Army of the Potomac is spread across this broad front in southern Pennsylvania and northern Maryland. So it's necessary to have these signal stations to ensure quick communication rather than the slow way of using a courier and a horse. And in fact, as George Meade lays out the idea for the Pipe Creek line on the evening of June 30th, he is sending the Reserve Corps or the Reserve Party of the Signal Corps out to help establish a Signal Corps line along Pipe Creek. So this factors into his plans for falling back to Pipe Creek, and as we know that doesn't happen. So the Signal Corps is actually, or one of the signal officers, a man named Aaron Jerome, and we're going to go back to the screen share here for a moment. When we look at a picture here of Aaron Jerome. So Aaron Jerome is the signal officer that is attached to John Buford's cavalry division. And before Schmucker Hall, the building that now houses the Seminary Ridge Museum, before that building was ever used as a hospital, which it's best known for during the Battle of Gettysburg, it was a signal station. When Buford's command arrives in Gettysburg on the afternoon of June 30th, 1863, he says to Aaron Jerome, "Go back and seek out the most prominent points, and and look for campfires in the evening, and in the morning look for dust." And this was an important function of those signal stations. I've talked a lot about the communication factor of these signal stations, but by virtue of the fact that these men who were signal officers had to be at a very high altitude in order to get communications back and forth among stations, they also would serve an important position or an important role of observation. So this is what Jerome is going to do on the evening of June 30th and the morning of July 1st. In fact, he really doesn't have anyone with whom to communicate. So he is up there in the cupola of Schmucker Hall with his very powerful telescope, watching the movements of the Confederate Army off in South Mountain off to the west. And we know that he is watching the campfires burn in the mountains. And he is watching and counting and pretty much has a very good idea of what Buford's command is going to be facing on the morning of July 1st. And this information, Jerome is feeding it to Buford. Buford is feeding it to Reynolds. Reynolds and Buford are both feeding it to Meade. So we have to remember that on the evening, by the time the nightfall on June 30th, the high command of the Army of the Potomac has a very, very good idea of what they are facing, who they are faced against, who are they going to be faced against the next morning on July 1st. So get to the morning of July 1st, and we have a couple of important roles that the Signal Corps is going to be playing. We're going to get to the next screen here, and you'll see on a map of the Gettysburg battlefield, and you'll see three circles on there. The blue circle, of course, is where is the location of Schmucker Hall, which I just talked about with Aaron Jerome. The yellow circle is Pennsylvania Hall on the campus of Pennsylvania College, and the red circle towards the bottom of the screen there is a signal station that's on Cemetery Hill. So as I said early in the morning, Jerome doesn't really have anyone with whom to communicate. He is up there in Schmucker Hall in the blue circle, watching for campfires at night, and in the morning watching for dust. There is evidence, though, that a signal officer, an unnamed signal officer, signal party, ends up going up to the top of Pennsylvania Hall there on the Gettysburg College, what's today Gettysburg College, at the time was Pennsylvania College campus, to make observations. And Michael Jacobs, who's a professor there at Pennsylvania College during the battle, and he ends up writing one of the first histories of the Battle of Gettysburg, and is very well known for keeping the weather book, weather records of the Battle of Gettysburg. He brings a Signal Corps party up to the top of Pennsylvania Hall, and as he had had done work and had experience in geology and botany and other earth sciences. He's able to help that Signal Corps party up there on the top of Pennsylvania Hall get a really good lay of the land. So again, not necessarily used as a station of communication, but also definitely used as a station of observation. So back to Schmucker Hall and Lieutenant Aaron Jerome, he's in the cupola of Schmucker Hall for most of the day, and by his own account, and he writes 2 letters to Winfield Scott Hancock after the Battle of Gettysburg. He's there until the building is almost taken over by the Confederates, and we know that he communicates at least once Oliver Howard's 11th Corps arrives on the battlefield. Jerome does finally have someone with whom to communicate, and communicates with the signal officers that are attached to Howard's command, that red circle down there. And if you see in the next slide, I'm going to show just briefly, we have, if it will load, this is a photograph, of course, from the cupola of Schmucker Hall, and that arrow there shows roughly East Cemetery Hill, where Howard's headquarters were on that first day of the battle. So he is able to, Jerome is able to use a flag to communicate there with those signal officers. And we know that the communication that he sends is telling Howard of Rhodes' advance on Oak Hill. You'll notice here that in brackets on this communication, it says July 2nd. I think it's very well accepted that the date was wrong when this was transcribed into the official records, that this is a communication from July 1st, 1863. But he writes, General Howard, over a division of rebels, is making a flank movement on our right. There is nothing but cavalry to oppose them. So he is informing Howard of the arrival of Confederates to the north of the Union line. So, of course, many of us know the story that by the end of the day on July 1st, 1863, the Union line on Seminary Ridge is overrun. The retreat back towards Cemetery Hill and the rally. And then, of course, on July 2nd and July 3rd, the Signal Corps is going to continue to play a very important role. And if anybody had the regular student of Gettysburg generally hears Signal Corps associated with what happens on July 2nd as the Confederate forces under General Hood and General McLaws are trying to make their movement around towards the Round Tops on July 2nd and come into sight of a signal station on Little Round Top. That, of course, is the most famous signal station during the Battle of Gettysburg, but it was only one of many that is in operation on July 2nd and July 3rd. I'm going to do a quick screen share here again of a map that's printed in that history of the Signal Corps that's written in the late 19th century, and it might be a little bit difficult to see here, but there is a signal station on Cemetery Hill. There is one at Meade's headquarters. There is one here, the one here on Little Round Top. There's one on Powers Hill, and by all accounts, there was a quote, I believe it's from the chief signal officer, Lemuel Norton. Every signal station was kept busily at work on July 2nd. So we know that communications are occurring at different parts of the battlefield throughout the day on July 2nd. But we also know that this is what drives, what pulls Gouverneur Warren over to Little Round Top on the afternoon of July 2nd, when he gets word from one of these signals that signal station on Little Round Top that Hood's and McLaw's men have moved around towards the left flank of the Union line. E.P. Alexander, who is one of the great fighters with Lee's army, and also is a great observer of what goes on during the Gettysburg campaign, says that, and these are his exact words, that wretched little signal station on Little Round Top cost us 2 hours. Because they have to counter march and don't get into position until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the attack steps off on July 2nd. And he lays the blame at the fact that this signal station was there. The signal stations throughout the battlefield, although they do get some of them get scattered during the bombardments preceding the Pickett Pettigrew assault. They are still in service on July 3rd. From what I can read, the stations that were in operation on the 2nd are still serving in their capacities on the 3rd. The 6th Corps is able to reopen that signal station on Little Round Top on the evening of the 2nd, and keeps operating it through the 3rd. And as the Confederate Army begins to pull back on July 4th and then eventually retreats on July 5th, some of the first men that kind of push into town to make some observations are the Signal Corps. And there are accounts on the 4th I'm sorry, I believe it's on the 5th, of a signal station on the courthouse watching the Confederates, the Confederate line go down the Fairfield Road towards Monterey Pass to retreat through the mountains. So still throughout this time, they're performing those observation and those communication duties, communicating that information back towards Meade's headquarters. One of the most interesting things that I rediscovered as I was preparing for this talk is that throughout the Battle of Gettysburg, according to one source I read, there is an open signal station on Jack's Mountain, and Jack's Mountain is right outside Fairfield. It's sort of not far from where Ski Liberty is today. And as the battle is occurring, there are men that are up on the signal station on Jack's Mountain that are able to communicate. They say that they are able to see the signal station on Little Round Top. They can't necessarily communicate with the signal station on Little Round Top, but they are able to communicate with a signal station that's open in Taneytown, Maryland, which is probably 20 miles away. And these men in the signal station on Jack's Mountain are able to see the Confederate lines from behind the lines. They write that they are able to see Pickett's men preparing for battle on the afternoon of July 1st. And these men who are up there on that Jack's Mountain signal station have to get out pretty quickly because the Confederate retreat is going to go right past Jack's Mountain. And a farmer from Fairfield comes up to them and says, "You got to get out of here quickly because the retreat's going to come by here." As they're trying to get back in touch with the Union Army that marches down to Frederick and then up the National Road through the passes in the South Mountains, they get a little turned around and end up getting captured by some of Stuart's cavalry and end up in Libby Prison in Richmond. But it's interesting to think about the fact that there are men that are from the Union Army that are watching what's going on the Confederate side from behind the lines. Throughout the retreat, signal stations continue to be important. As the army is marching up, the Army of the Potomac is marching up that National Road through Turner's Gap. There's a signal station that's opened around the Washington Monument right outside of Boonesboro. They're watching the retreat of the Confederate Army through there. More and more men end up being dispatched from Georgetown to help bolster the numbers of the Signal Corps during this time to make sure that communications and observations stay open to the Army High Command, the Army of the Potomac High Command. And they continue to play that role as the Army of the Potomac. Hang on here, I lost my video. The Army of the Potomac High Command. Hang on.